What are the most suspicious coincidences in history? The size of the sun and moon in relation to each other, and their distance from the earth, and positions in the sky, are in the exact proportions to make solar eclipses possible. Ditto rotation and orbit speeds of the moon are such that we always see the same face. There was a guy on death row who was supposed to be killed by electrocution. His lawyer got him out of death row, but he was later found on his cell's toilet electrocuted by the headphones he had plugged into his TV and was trying to fix with his teeth. Decades later, another person was supposed to get the electric chair, again was stayed from the electrocution, and again was found on his cell's toilet, electrocuted by headphones plugged into his TV. Seems too suspicious to me. Not long after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in 1963, the list of seemingly amazing coincidences between the two men's lives appeared, and it has been widely and continuously reprinted and circulated ever since. Abraham Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846. John F. Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946. Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860. John F. Kennedy was elected president in 1960. The names Lincoln and Kennedy each contain 7 letters. Both were particularly concerned with civil rights. Both wives lost their children while living in the White House. Both presidents were shot on a Friday. Both were shot in the head. Lincoln's secretary, Kennedy, warned him not to go to the theater. Kennedy's secretary, Lincoln, warned him not to go to Dallas. Both were assassinated by Southerners. Both were succeeded by Southerners. Both successors were named Johnson. Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, was born in 1808. Lyndon Johnson, who succeeded Kennedy, was born in 1908. John Wilkes Booth was born in 1839. Lee Harvey Oswald was born in 1939. Both assassins were known by their 3 names. Both names are comprised of 15 letters. Booth ran from the theater and was caught in a warehouse. Oswald ran from a warehouse and was caught in a theater. Booth and Oswald were assassinated before their trials. Despite the seemingly impressive surface appearance, several of these entries are either misleading or factually incorrect, and the rest are mostly mere superficial coincidences that fail to touch upon the much more substantial differences and dissimilarities that underlie them. Let's examine them one at a time. Abraham Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846. John F. Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946. First of all, we have to note, in regard to this and subsequent entries, that 2 similar events taking place 100 years apart is no more of an amazing coincidence than if those events had occurred 92 or 105 years apart. It's only something we take note of and think special because of our non-logical fascination with round numbers. In this particular case, the statement is literally true as worded. Both Lincoln and Kennedy were first elected to Congress 100 years apart. Aside from that minor similarity, however, their political careers bore little resemblance to each other. Lincoln was an Illinois state legislator who, outside of his election to a single term in the U.S. House of Representatives, failed in his every attempt to gain national political office until he was elected president in 1860, including an unsuccessful bid for the Senate in 1854, an unsuccessful bid to become the Republican vice presidential candidate in 1856, and another unsuccessful bid for a Senate seat in 1858. Kennedy, on the other hand, enjoyed an unbroken string of political successes at the national level. When he entered the political arena after World War II, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1946, re-elected to the House in 1948, re-elected again in 1950, won a U.S. Senate seat in 1952, was re-elected to the Senate in 1958, and was elected president in 1960. I always enjoy that the moon is 400 times smaller in diameter than the sun, but the sun is 400 times the distance to Earth than the moon is, making them both approximately the same size to our eyes. He was a grocer who lived in Manassas, Virginia, where the First Battle of Bull Run, one of the first battles of the Civil War, took place on July 21, 1861. The Confederates used his house as a base, and a cannonball came in through his window. Fearing for his family's safety, he moved to the small town of Appomattox Courthouse. Almost 4 years later, on April 9, 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses Grant. The surrender was signed in McLean's parlor. The first major battle took place in his front yard, and although he moved, the war found its way back to him. It started and ended on his property. Kennedy just so happened to be driving by when a bullet hit him. Can you imagine trying out your new gun and the effing president get in front of the sights? Like, what a bruh moment. The British actor Anthony Hopkins, who shot to fame as Hannibal Lecter, was delighted to hear that he had landed a leading role in a film based on the book The Girl from Petrovka by George Feiffer. A few days after signing the contract, Hopkins traveled to London to buy a copy of the book. He tried several bookshops, but there wasn't one to be had. Waiting at Leicester Square Underground for his train home, he noticed a book apparently discarded on a bench. Incredibly, it was The Girl from Petrovka. That in itself would have been coincidence enough, but in fact it was merely the beginning of an extraordinary chain of events. 2 years later, in the middle of filming in Vienna, Hopkins was visited by George Feiffer, the author. Feiffer mentioned that he did not have a copy of his own book. He had lent the last one, containing his own annotations, to a friend who had lost it somewhere in London. With mounting astonishment, Hopkins handed Feiffer the book he had found. "Is this the one?" he asked, with the notes scribbled in the margins. It was the same book. The first British soldier killed in World War I and the last to be killed in that conflict are interred within 6 feet of each other. No one noticed at the time, and it wasn't until the arduous task of trying to compile the lists and whereabouts of the horrific number of dead by the British government years after the war that the position of their graves was noticed. When they shot The Wizard of Oz, the actor who played the wizard, Frank Morgan, wanted to have a coat that looked elegant, but had gone to seed. The wardrobe department visited a second-hand store and purchased an entire rack of coats for him to choose from. One day while wearing the coat he chose on set, he turned one of the pockets to discover a label indicating that the coat had been made for L. Frank Baum, or in other words, the author of The Wizard of Oz. They contacted his wife who was still alive, and it was verified that the coat once belonged to him. After filming was finished, the coat was returned to milliseconds. Boom. During an August 17, 1957, game, Philadelphia Phillies outfielder Richie Ashburn hit a foul ball into the stands that struck spectator Alice Roth, wife of Philadelphia Bulletin sports editor Earl Roth, breaking her nose. When play resumed, Ashburn fouled off another ball that struck her while she was being carried off in a stretcher. 9/11. There was a training exercise in Canada that had a lot of our pilots and planes therefore joined exercises, so even if we knew there was hijackings, no planes were near to do anything. I can tell you that after the second tower fell, I hightailed it out of the city, grabbed my car in Jersey City, and was driving through Hoboken before the first fighter jet arrived. That was more than an hour after the first plane hit. So, a few years ago I was at this Comic Con near Lisburn in Northern Ireland. One of the panels was for actors who were in Uncharted, and those in the panel were Nolan North, Nathan Drake, Emily Rose, Elena Drake-Nay Fisher, and Troy Baker, Samuel Drake. One of the questions was, how did you get involved in the series? Nolan had done some voice work before, and took the audition, because he was interested. Baker took the role, because he had worked with Naughty Dog on The Last of Us, and was a fan of the series. But Emily's response was the wildest. So, around the time of the auditions, Emily wasn't even a working actress, but was instead an acting teacher's assistant, helping teach young children in a nearby school how to act. She was only helping in the business, because the teacher she was working with was a director, and he was working as the director for Uncharted, and had asked her, as a favor, can you come into this audition and read lines for us? So, she goes to the audition with the goal of helping cast another actor in the series and getting experience so she could get a master's degree to become a high school drama teacher. But the people at Naughty Dog liked her performance so much that they decided, hey, why not come back later and try to audition yourself? You might be precisely what we are looking for. So she comes back later, she auditions for the role of Alina, gets the part. And here's where things get weird. And to illustrate this isn't made up, I digged up the clip on YouTube and timestamped it. Nobody noticed at the time, but when she was leaving, after being informed she got the part, one of the people working at Naughty Dog looked at the vehicle and kind of freaked out. Because Emily's car had a license plate holder that was the Naughty Dog logo. And why was that specific license plate holder on Emily's car? Because she bought the car used directly from an artist who worked for Naughty Dog. During her entire undergraduate career up to the point where she auditioned, she was driving that car around the state of California. In the 1200s, Japanese settlements were being invaded by the Mongols. The Mongols had the largest naval fleet ever amassed at the time, and Japan was facing an extremely dire situation. However, the Mongol fleet was swept up almost entirely in a great typhoon that eviscerated their forces, saving the Japanese. 7 years later, the Mongols returned and were destroyed by yet another typhoon. These typhoons were named Divine Wind or Kamikaze. The soldiers in Wei were to be the same divine wind that would sweep the enemy from the seas like before. Roman Emperor Julian wanted to build the sacred third temple of the Jews. He wanted to do so for some not so good reasons. However, each time the temple was worked on, flames would come out from the earth and burn the workers, and an earthquake happened. The project was abandoned. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams would both die within hours apart on the 4th of July. Edit. People saying Julian is bull. Wiki lists non-Christian sources. That's all I can tell ya. I don't really know either way. According to various ancient sources, including Sozomen, c. 400-457, in his Historia Ecclesiastica, and the pagan historian and close friend of Julian, Ammianus Marcellinus, 14, the project of rebuilding the temple was aborted because each time the workers tried to build the temple using the existing substructure, they were burned by terrible flames coming from inside the earth. And an earthquake negated what work was made.